how was the big wedding?
Oh, haven't you heard?
No.
So it's at the end of the night, everyone's on the dance floor really getting into it, you know? And say, this is my left wheel, and this is the bride's foot.
Yeah.
Bush.
How awful.
Well, it wasn't all bad. I left with the best man's number.
You are terrible.
Guilty.
I'm not inviting you to my wedding. No. That's it, you're off the list.
All right, welcome to our first international guest on the Normalist podcast, Samantha Renke, and your little sidekick there, Lola.
My sidekick. This is Lola. She's moaning. I don't know what she wants. She's already had food twice this morning. So it's the morning in the UK. And I've already fed her twice, but now she's going. She's just crawling all over everything at the moment. They're two Sphinx cats, so you know the naked cats. I don't know if any of your listeners like, you know, the show Friends. It's such a shame because they get such a bad reputation, but they're the most loving and endearing cats. Although she doesn't look like a normal Sphinx cat. But my little boy Bruno, he literally looks like a chicken, like a ball sack. he looks like a scrotum. I don't know whether I can say scrotum on this channel, but I just did. So they might come and say hello intermittently throughout today's chat.
Yeah, potentially a cameo from little Bruno a bit later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's great to have you, Samantha. As you said, all the way from London, United Kingdom. So over the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea over there. So it's about mid-morning over there. For me, it's 8 o'clock. So late evening.
Well, there you go. I know, and you would have thought that it's much, much earlier because I literally look like I've rolled out of bed. I promise I've been up since 6 a.m. and this is the effort that I've made for you. In my defense, I've got to go to a really nice a book launch tonight of a fellow friend who is hearing impaired. And so she's just brought a book out. So I'm going to go to Trafalgar Square tonight. And I thought, you know what? I can't be bothered to put my makeup on twice in one day. So this is what you're getting. You're getting disheveled Samantha. You think that people work in television are glamorous, and I've proved you wrong. So there we go.
I think people can jump on the Normalist podcast YouTube channel, and you can give Samantha a bit of a rating for her outfit. She says it's disheveled. I think
that's cruel.
Color coordinated.
That's cruel. I think that would put me into a deep depression.
Well, in all seriousness, though, Samantha, a woman of many talents, to say the least, an actress, presenter, speaker, writer, and disability rights campaigner. You've appeared in various different TV commercials and TV shows for the BBC, ITV, and even Amazon Prime. But most importantly, and I think the way most people would remember you, is the infamous Malteser commercial.
Did you get that? You didn't get that where you were, did you? Surely not.
I as always, I do a bit of digging around before I get my guests on, just to do my research and make sure that got all my bases covered. But yeah, I was watching that, and I've actually done a bit of a screen recording. I'm going to include that in the intro.
Oh,
to the full clip on YouTube, so everyone can.
Thanks for that.
But that was really quite a laugh, wasn't it? It was really
Yeah,
really well done, really
absolutely.
funny.
So I'll tell you a little bit how that came about. So I moved to London in 2012. I actually trained as a high school teacher, worked in a school for a couple of years. Was a bit like, nah, this is not the life for me. I often joke and I say, you know, I didn't like children, and that was the epiphany that I was like, I just don't like children. But no, it was absolutely contrary to that. I love the kids, and they were so respectful, and I actually love being that role model. I love not only being a teacher, but also, you know, being able to show them a different viewpoint of disability. So I'm a full-time wheelchair user, and I've got a petite stature. You know, visibly I look very different, but to be quite honest with you, the kids were wonderful. It just wasn't right for me. I'm very much, as you just said, with all those accolades, I'm very much a person that gets bored quite easily. And I need to keep dipping into lots of different projects, and I like to say yes to things. And I think the education system, although there is a little bit of flexibility and there is a little bit of spontaneity, you are still you are still in quite a rigid institution, you know, that doesn't always allow for creativity, or as much as I like. So when I moved to London, I fell into acting, and the Maltesers advert, that was kind of my first big acting role. So it's a really well-known chocolate, particularly over in the UK. Sorry, I've got a bit of fluff in my
Australia
eye.
too. Maltesers are
Um,
hard over here as well.
yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because at the time there was a real drive, a real initiative to understand the importance of representation in media. And I was very much riding that wave. I was very much one of the handful of disabled creatives that were really pushing that initiative, not only in front of the camera, but kind of educating behind the camera. And a lot of people think that someone just grabbed me off the street and was like, "Hey, could you do this chocolate commercial?" And I was like, it didn't really work like that. I did have an agent. I did go for a audition. I did go for a second callback audition, so I paid my dues. And why it was so groundbreaking and so inspiring for a lot of people, and I suppose like game changing, was not only did we see, protagonists, disabled female leads, being cheeky, sassy, talking about sex and relationship, talking about, just being a normal human being. And these commercials, it was actually a competition. It was a competition held by one of our main broadcasters, Channel 4. And it was to the lead up to the Para 2016. So the Paralympics 2012 were really successful. And that really put, that was integral to changing the landscape of disability. So, in 2016, when they came to the UK, there was this real drive to get disability, out there, not just for, 2 weeks of the Paralympics. So the commercials, they actually they launched, so they they had their debut at the opening ceremonies of the 2016 Paralympics. I actually had like a little party at my flat in London. I had a few friends over, for a few drinks, and it was groundbreaking because we'd never really seen anything like that before. And it's kind of a bittersweet story, because for me, as an actress, it was, my first real big paid job. Like I was like, oh my God, they're gonna pay me for to eat chocolate. That's amazing. And it obviously helped get a lot of my feet through many, many doors, and people recognize me even now. Like, how many years later? I can't do math. 2016. Like, how many years later? 7 years? Is it already?
Yeah.
Jeez. Like, even, that now people stop me, and like particularly men in like vans. Oh, you're the girl from the Malteser advert. But, at the time people would, really stop me and engage with me, and kind of break down those barriers of awkwardness around disability. But also, the bittersweet element was, I don't think we've necessarily seen anything as groundbreaking since then, which is a little bit sad. Of course, representation is very much at the forefront of brands and, marketing, which it should be. But I feel like, that rawness and that kind of, that, just not being scared of doing something so bold where disability is concerned. I don't feel like we've had much of that. And also, on a personal level, I was, subject to horrific trolling, after the commercial came out. And that was alarming to me. I suppose I was quite naive. I'd like to think that I surround myself with people who are my cheerleaders, people who, obviously recognize I have a disability, but don't really give a shit, you're just Sam and you're great. And, to open up my phone and have people say that I'm not a real human, that I'm vile, that I make them. Someone even said the girl on the Malteser advert has put me off eating chocolate. I mean, for God's sake, like, like really, I don't think anything would put me off eating chocolate. But there was people telling me that I should kill myself and so on and so forth, and it was a really hard time for me, and it had a very negative impact on my sense of self-worth and my confidence. And for quite some time, I let them win, and I wouldn't accept other TV opportunities because I was so fearful that, if I were to take them, I really didn't want to open up my phone. And then after about, I would say it was probably a good 3 months of just feeling really like a victim, which in many respects I was, but I really internalized it. I kind of, I got my shit together, and I was like, look, no, remember why you did this, and remember how much fun you had, and remember the reason why you moved to London, and remember all the reasons why you do what you do. And I actually wrote about my experience in the Huffington Post, and kind of I changed the narrative. And ironically, like that article in the Huffington Post sharing the abuse that I got, it was so well received, and that really perpetuated my career as an activist and a campaigner. Sorry, I do talk a lot. I do apologize.
Oh, it's great.
You're probably thinking, let me get a word in, Edwin.
No,
Let me have a question in.
No, yeah, but so you said the Huffington Post, but you've also been a columnist for the Metro as well, and Possibility magazine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So Possibility magazine is one of the UK's leading disability magazines. And I'm very much, of the mindset. So I've actually just written my first memoir, You Are the Best Thing Since Sliced Bread, my first book. So that came out last year. And, the kind of message throughout that is, kind of say yes to opportunities, push yourself out of your comfort zones. But also, when you're living with a physical disability, so I've got brittle bones, so my bones can break very easily. I've had around 200 fractures in my life, so sometimes my body can absolutely let me down on an epic way. And that can be, frustrating and sad and painful. But I always believe that, if you have the right support system in place, then irrespective of your condition or your chronic illness, you can still do what you want to do. It might be in a diluted way, and that was very true of Possibility magazine. I was, I was really struggling getting, acting work. I felt really deflated, and my health was pretty rubbish. And I just sat there, and I used to just like write my thought. I'm a thinker, and I just used to write my thoughts. And I came across Possibility magazine. I think someone gave me a free copy, and I'd never seen anything like it before, disability magazine. And I just emailed the editor, and I went, hey, this is who I am. Can you please publish my work? And you know what? I think nearly coming on 10 years I've been writing for them, and very similar, writing for the Metro. So all these opportunities, in fact, a lot of my opportunities have come in times of great despair, or come in times where I've lost sight of my own worth and my own capabilities. And then I often call them, like, I have like 3 or 4 days of like violin days if I'm feeling a bit rubbish about the world. And so I'll allow myself to feel those emotions and feel crappy and like be an absolute bitch, like, to be honest, be like just a horrible person. And then after that, I'm like, right, okay, you've done enough wallowing, right? Get going. And my sister gave me the best advice ever in my entire life. She said, no matter what you do, no matter how big or small, so even if it's like, writing your thoughts onto your phone in a note form, and then submitting them to a paper, whether it goes anywhere or not, or even opening up a Twitter account, or opening up a LinkedIn account, no matter what you do, big or small, as long as it's something that is connected to your dream and your ambition, you will get there. And I truly believe that. I think we can give ourselves such a hard time that, particularly with like the social media, and how we constantly look at other people and go, well, I want what they have. And the funny thing with that is, I think it's important to have role models, and I hope that I am indeed a role model. But I think sometimes like we're looking at other people and go, well, why can't I have that? I want that. They got everything. I'm like, but that's their dream. That's their ambition. That was their focus and their aspiration. Like you're never going to get that because that is what they wanted for themselves. You need to work on what you want for yourself. And I think that has been something that has really grounded me throughout my career.
Yeah, it's incredible because you talked a bit about the magazine there, the Possibility magazine, and how you were kind of amazed that there was a form of publication that was based just purely around people living with a disability.
Yeah.
And there's also a heap of awards that, even I was surprised when I was looking into kind of your history and the accolades you've achieved. But you're actually listed as number 3 in the UK's most influential disabled people for 2020. And then you're on that list again in 2018 and 2019 as well. Campaigner of the Year in the 2019 European Diversity Awards. And the big one, Celebrity of the Year at the 2020 National Diversity Awards. But you're really aligned, I guess, with the pillars of the Normless podcast, which is why initially I reached out to get you on. I think
thank
it's
you.
really
Can I
incredible
just
work.
say, I'm having to throw, sorry to cut you off. My cats are fighting. I'm having to throw something to stop them fighting. Right.
Oh, good.
I'm so sorry. I think one of them's in pain. Can I just, for 1
I'll give you
second, go and shout at them?
Intermission break.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good.
Yeah. I don't want to have to go to the vet.
So who wins? Bruno, so you said
Mostly Lola. Lola is a little bit bigger than Bruno. But they're just they're both on my bed and they're just both fighting over who gets the comfiest spot. They've got sorry, did you hear that then? Right, one of them's gone now. I think it's a change in weather because it's springtime and because they're indoor cats. So I'm actually moving out of London this year to somewhere with like a green space. Thank goodness. But I think because they've like they want to be out and about and they want to do stuff, they've just become, what's the word? Little shits recently. And I don't have pet insurance. So I don't want one of them to gouge the other one's eye out. So yeah.
Giving you a bit of a brief on the Normless podcast, and essentially we have 4 main pillars for the Normless podcast. The first one being new and unique philosophies. The second one being knowledge of intriguing topics that inform or challenge, which I think is perfectly aligns with some of what we've already discussed about challenging those stereotypes placed upon people living with a disability. And then also lessons learnt through tough life experiences and sacrifices, and also adapting to new structures and achieving reinvention. So I guess the challenges for you living with osteogenesis imperfecta is something I kind of want to explore now. We talked briefly about it just before your cats got entangled in a bit of a wrestling match on the bed there. Poor old Lola and Bruno got at it for a bit, but we're back. And now, can you give the listeners just a bit of a background in terms of what osteogenesis imperfecta are?
Absolutely. But I think, first of all, though, I'd like to say that I believe in the social model of disability. So for anyone who's listening who isn't aware of it, I believe that my condition, so brittle bones, which is osteogenesis, I'm not disabled by that. It's actually my environment. So we can identify that, the disability community, whether that's if you're deaf, disabled, or neurodivergent, we are disabled by 3 pillars. So either physical barriers, information or communication barriers, or attitudinal barriers. So depending on where I am or who I'm with, that's when I become disabled. So although, yes, I've got this condition, which is quite a rare genetic condition. So I believe in the UK, 1 in 15,000 people have got brittle bones. There are different severities. I've got type 3, which is actually a completely different mutation. And what I mean by that is, brittle bones is a hereditary condition. So normally your parents would pass that on to you. But none of my family have the condition. So I was just like a completely different fluke. However, that doesn't mean that I can't then, if I ever choose to have children, I've got quite a higher chance of passing that on. So it's actually, when you talk about brittle bones, people automatically think it might be like a collagen deficiency or something similar to osteoporosis, and it's absolutely not. It's collagen deficiency. So I don't have type 1 collagen in my body. And collagen, like, so that's the people obviously know the word collagen because some people might shove it in their faces. Actually, humans, we produce naturally collagen. There's all different types of collagen, but type 1 is like the biggest kind of collagen, and that can be found in pretty much every aspect of human, makeup. So our bones, our arteries, our hair, our skin, and so on and so forth. So me having not producing that type 1 basically means that my bones are incredibly weak and fragile. My joints are very I've got hyperflexivity, so my dexterity is quite weak. So I've got bendy fingers and toes and all that. And also, we can be prone to things such as hemorrhages, deafness, and so on and so forth. But we often only think of osteogenesis to do with the bones, because I guess the skeleton makes up such a huge part of who we are as humans. So when I was born, I was actually born in Germany. My mum's German, my dad was British. He was in the army, my mum was a nurse, so they had a bit of a whirlwind romance. And my sister Stephanie, who is a little bit older, she was born without a disability, and then I came into the world, and I was a bit of a shock to everybody. And unfortunately, the prognosis wasn't that great. Everybody, I always say, everyone had their Debbie Downers that day. Everybody was very negative, and I came into this world with quite a negative, harmful, stereotypical label, and that was disabled and all the negative connotations that go with being disabled. And I guess I've kind of always wanted to negate those attitudes, and I think my strength is, you can say that it could be circumstantial, but I think my strength has been an innate sense of self-worth. Like I always, my early childhood was me being incredibly confident, incredibly cheeky, incredibly sassy. I love the attention that I would get from people. Like, I didn't realize that when people came up to me, this cute little blonde girl in a wheelchair, and they go, "Oh, boo, 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 boo," like I talk to my cat, basically, in a quite a condescending, patronizing baby voice. But I kind of love that. I love being the center of attention. I love like being like, yeah, I'm different. And I guess as you get older, and like a lot of us, irrespective of having a disability, we can all relate to the fact that we start to go through puberty, and we start to hate our bodies, and we start to feel self-conscious. So I, over the years, that sense of self-worth definitely got chipped away at, and I started to adopt or internalize the ableism of the world. So the ableism is the ideology that if you're only seen as normal or of value in this world if you can walk, if you can see, if you can talk, if you don't deviate from society's image of what normal is. So I started to internalize a lot of that, and I suppose my teenage years, I felt very, very alone, and felt like disability absolutely is a dirty word, and I should feel ashamed of that really big characteristic, that really big part of my identity.
Yeah, there was actually, and it was interesting because you brought up that social model of
Yeah.
disability. I was actually looking at a review paper which was published in the Frontiers of Psychology in 2021, and they looked at different factors affecting the perception of disability. And as the perception of disability is a really important construct because it affects not only the well-being of individuals like yourself who are living with a disability, but also the moral compass of society and the way that society perceives individuals living with a disability. And so there's the two conceptual models. There's the medical model, which looks at disability as a feature of that individual, and it's caused by disease or trauma, which is, as you said, it'll be interesting to hear about the incidence of that type 3 mutation that you were talking about. But so, not moving away from that medical model, I guess now you're kind of paving the way for a focus more on that social model, raise more awareness, how it's like more of an attribute of the individual, but it's a societal created problem as opposed to, you know, being based around that individual and the pathology behind it.
Yeah, so I mean, like the medical model sees the disabled individual as a problem and a problem, you know, that they need to solve on their own. So it's like, right, well, shit to be in a wheelchair, but that's your problem. Like, you know what I mean? If you and I were to like go to a restaurant, you know, the restaurant, the lift was broken, and me as a wheelchair user, you know, you'd be like, oh, sorry about that, Sam. See you later. I'm gonna go enjoy this meal. You know, so the medical model, so you know, very much focuses on what the individual can't do and really pushes for a cure. So it puts the onus on that individual. Whereas, you know, the social model is like, well, actually, you know, let's stop blaming disabled people for you know their conditions or the way they were born. And I'll give you a really good example. So, you know, I'm currently in central London. I'm renting a property. The property, I would say, is 70% accessible. So what does that look like? My front door is automatic. My windows are automatic. I have a wet room instead of a bathroom. My light switches are lower. My plug sockets are higher. My kitchen is on hydraulics, so it goes up and down, so on and so forth. So yes, of course, I will always have brittle bones. You can put me anywhere. You know, you can put me on the moon, and I'll have that. But in my own environment, I don't identify as having a disability. But as soon as I come out of my front door, the pavements are full of potholes, or they don't have sufficient drops in the pavement, the curves. So that's when I become disabled. Now, there are lots of different models of disability. That the medical model and the social model are the ones that are, you know, most talked about. But there's a lot of in betweens, because obviously, you know, people are not a monolith. Disabled people are not a monolith, and we don't all think the same. And there might actually be a lot of disabled people out there and go, well, actually, screw the social model, because actually my body does let me down, and actually I don't like being in a wheelchair, or I don't like being blind, or, you know, that there's that thought process, and anyone who thinks like that, they are absolutely valid, and they're allowed to have their, you know, kind of thoughts. But I have a take on it in the sense of, and I alluded to this earlier, yes, you know, when my body lets me down, when I have a fracture, I can't go out and about. Like, life is difficult for me. Like, as a wheelchair user, if you think about it, when I break an arm, that's problematic, because I can't walk. But I still would say that although that is a direct cause from my condition, I would still argue that so long as, you know, I can contact my agent or any of the clients or partners that I'm working with and say, hey, this is happening. Are you okay for me to work in a hybrid way or in a remote way? You know, can I Zoom? Can I do this? Can I do that? You know, can I leave my camera off when we're having a meeting because actually I'm in bed with a broken arm? Or, you know, make sure that my local authorities give me more support, so I have more support time with my PA. You know, or the fact that, you know, I've recently been given a power wheelchair, you know, by a charity, by the British Bone Society. You know, all these things, like I said, if you give people the tools, then actually, even when your body does let you down, I still believe that, you know, we don't necessarily have to be disabled by our medical conditions.
Do you think I'd be right in saying the medical model is very an isolated viewpoint? With the
I mean, the medical model absolutely isn't. It's institutionalized, it's systemic, and, you know, the word medical, because medicine is all about curing and fixing people. So, for example, I've had a lot of medical interventions. So I've had the whole of my spine rodded with metalwork. I've had all my legs rodded with metalwork. Now, I am not saying that I didn't want to have these operations. They have been invaluable. They have allowed me to not experience as much pain. They have even increased my life expectancy. I had really bad scoliosis. My spine started to dramatically curve from the age of 10. So of course there is space for intervention, and there is space for this ideology that we can improve the quality of people's lives. But the difference is, I've also had medical interventions such as cutting the back of my tendons at the back of my ankles, cutting them to make them shorter. And the only reason I had these really invasive painful operations, which, meant that I was out of school, away from my peers, in hospital. The only reason I had them was because society thought, so that was all the medical professionals, my family members, and so on and so forth. They thought that if they cut my tendons, I would be able to walk and my quality of life would be better because I would change how I was to fit into a walking world. Whereas in
Social model
hindsight,
looks at the
I've
ergonomics of it.
I've never walked. Like I said, it was my problem to overcome. It was up to me to fit into a world that wasn't designed for me. So this is what we talk about when we talk about the medical model. I do a lot on female sexual health and the importance of creating awareness around that. I'm just recently I'm working with the University of Kiel over here on a research project to look at the barriers facing women, physically disabled women who go for cervical screening, and a lot of the provisions aren't set up, so women aren't even having smear tests because they can't access their GP services. And this is what, when we talk about, the medical model, we talk about infantilization. We talk about, kind of seeing disabled people as just their diagnosis and not human beings. A friend of mine, she wrote about it. She's got cerebral palsy, which means she has quite involuntary muscle spasms. She went for a routine sexual health smear test. And because they didn't give her in advance a sedative to calm the muscle spasms, and they couldn't do the procedure, which is a regular, a straightforward procedure. And the doctor turned around and said, well, don't worry, because lightning won't strike twice, meaning you've already got cerebral palsy. The likelihood of you getting cervical cancer, probably not. So this is how harmful and how institutionalized the medical model of disability is. And it's something that because when we're talking about medical and healthcare, people still see doctors and nurses and so on. Of course, we've got to respect them, but they still see them as their word is gospel. And actually, we need to step back and go, well, that might not be the case, because they are still very much in the mindset of wanting disabled people to change to fit into society.
Would I be correct in saying that the modern world is very much progressing in the sense of ergonomically adapting to, like, in terms of that social model and ensuring that environments are more ergonomically suitable for people like yourself on wheelchairs and immobile? So I was looking at one of our previous guests on the podcast, Martin Meredith, in episode 2. He, over here in Australia, you probably know there's obviously the Super League in the UK, but we have the National Rugby League, and there's also a wheelchair league. Now he was the chairman for that wheelchair league, and he also was talking a little bit about disabled athletes and the opportunities they have in the game as well. And there's actually in Collaroy, which is over on the Northern Beaches here where we are in Sydney, there is actually a new facility there called the Sargwood Spinal Injury Accommodation Facility. It's got fully accessible, wheelchair access. It's funded by iCare, NDIS, and the Sargwood Foundation, which is a charity-based organisation. And they've created a whole host of opportunities to allow families to holiday, for people to go in and undertake rehabilitation courses and programs. Would you agree with me in saying that the world is progressing in that sense, or are we still behind the 8 ball?
So I get asked this question a lot, and I'm not diminishing any of the positive, what you just shared with me there. But actually, I often turn it around and go, is it getting better for who, and by what standard are we measuring this by? Are we measuring this by 20 years ago? But actually, society as a whole, we've moved on. So if I were to tell you that disabled people still do not have marriage equality, how would you feel about that?
Yeah, well, I think you obviously look at that, and you look at those two models we just discussed, and the medical model would suggest that this makes things difficult for individuals living with a disability. But from a social model perspective, you say, well, in terms of equality and ensuring that the environment is suitable for that individual can foster a relationship between someone living with in disability, and then, you know, someone who is living without a disability like osteogenesis imperfecta. So I guess as you say, there's two different models, and there's different perspectives we can look at that issue. But I guess in terms of the environment that surrounds the individual, in my perspective, is the most important thing, the way which we support those individuals to foster their ability to experience life in a way that it's almost like a handicap in golf, for instance, someone who's a more got athletic prowess or a better skill set in a certain sport. For instance, golf, they have a different handicap to someone who's more of an amateur. And that levels the playing field to some extent.
Exactly. And you've hit the nail on the head. It's about leveling the playing field. It's not about, you know, we often get confused with, like, you know, disabled people get special treatment. It's not about special treatment. You know, me being able to access a bathroom when I'm out and about, you know, that's not special treatment. That's like a basic human right. And, you know, this is why I'm very, you know, stubborn, I suppose, when it comes to not just rolling over and going, yeah, everything's great now. You know, people like me are on telly, and yeah, you know, because actually, if we look, and I hate to bore people with figures, but unemployment amongst disabled people is the highest. You know, women with disabilities are twice as likely to be sexually assaulted. You know, we don't have marriage equality. Most of the time when I leave my own house in London, which is like supposed to be one of the best cities in the whole entire world, most of my local facilities in the area still don't have step-free access. You know, so when you're making these comparisons, then no, I do not think we are at a level where we need to be. And a lot of that is because we don't have the legislation with law in the law that has, I suppose, repercussions. You know, we have the Equality Act, we have, you know, the Reasonable Adjustments Act in the UK, but it's such a grey area. There's so many kind of get out clauses, like, you know, it says, oh yeah, everywhere has to be accessible except blah, 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 you know? And it's a bit like, well, if the law isn't on our side, I always use a really good example. When I used to travel quite a lot on the train system, I love traveling on the train. But on a train, no matter how big or small the train is, there's only 2 spaces for wheelchair users. If that is blocked, if someone else is on there, you're not legally allowed to get on the train. And a lot of people will just abuse that space by putting their luggage, you know, leaving things there and blocking it. There is a sign there that says, this is priority by law. Yeah, this is priority by law. But why do people still put things there?
Yeah, I can resonate with that. Yeah, even back when I was in primary school, high school, I remember getting on the bus after school, coming home, and there's those 4 in Australia. You have the buses, and there's 4 on each side, 4 disabled seats right at the front of the bus for easy access. And I still remember kids taking up those as soon as they jump on the bus. They would occupy those seats first.
Yeah. It's you know, it goes back to, you know, well, disabled people don't have normal lives. We don't go to work. We don't have boyfriends. We don't go clubbing. We don't socialize. We might go to hospital now and again. So there's that kind of really medical model, negative, stereotypical view. But also because the law, there's no, for me, and this is a personal opinion, there's no consequence. If you had the sign there that said, this is priority by law, anyone abusing this space will be fined £50 on the spot. Do you think people would abuse that space? No.
Yeah, it's really another issue is also, I find, like taking back to where you were talking about being an adolescent. I was recently listening to a podcast. I don't know if you've listened to it, Rich Roll, and he was talking to Lisa D'Amour, which is like a psychologist, and she was looking at the emotional lives of teenagers, navigating adolescence and puberty and that kind of thing. And they discussed how challenging a time it can be, not only for parents, but also the adolescents themselves going through a phase of self-development and self-discovery. And in that paper I was referring to before, that systematic review, from 2021, there was a paper in there that I came across from Graham Zhao and Gartner 2005, and they looked at children 4 years of age, and this is a time when they start manifesting what's called in-group positivity. And so, if you were looking at what's the I guess direct opposite to that would be the out group, and they're the minority groups, so those of color, disability, alternative sexual orientation. And essentially at this age, children start manifesting in-group positivity bias, and they seemingly extrapolate self-related positivity towards groups that they personally affiliate with. And I think that's a really toxic, and to have that being kids developing that at the age of 4, especially, leading into a time like adolescence where they start to develop a bit of self-meaning, purpose, and who they identify and where they sort of fit in society. That surely was a huge challenge for you too. And I'm not sure, as you were talking about where you were working in education early on before you moved to London, did you see much of that? And how was that kind of experience for you personally?
I think it's human nature, because we've got the fight or flight built in. It's human nature to gravitate towards people that we can see ourselves in. Because, we back in the day, we had to stick to people that we felt secure with, so that's, kind of alluding to what you're talking about. So this is why inclusion and representation is really important. So when I started school, I was initially put in what we would identify as a special school. So a school that was designed for deaf, disabled, or neurodivergent individuals. And most of my peers, they had cognitive disabilities. So I have a physical disability. And I vividly remember, so I must have been 4 years old, 5 years old. And I remember I have got some of the most profound memories of being in that school, because I felt like I did not fit.
Belong, yeah.
I was put into this school with other disabled kids, and because I could communicate in a very different way to how they could communicate, I really, really struggled. So it was, determined quite quickly that wasn't probably the best place for me. So I was then transferred to mainstream school. And it's really funny because my infant school and primary school, when I first showed up, and there's this petite little girl in a big power wheelchair, and I remember all the kids were crowding around me and kind of, timid and not too sure what to say. But then we all went and played out on the field at lunchtime, and there was little daisies growing on the grass. And all the children, one of them obviously started it, but all the kids started picking the daisies and putting them on my wheelchair, my foot plate. And then after that, I was just part of the gang. Like I was just, one of the kids. And then when it was time for me to go up to secondary school, we actually were going to emigrate to New Zealand, funnily enough. So we've got family in New Zealand. And then my dad suddenly dropped down dead of a brain hemorrhage. So that kind of really put a a spin on everything. So it went from me being, supposed to be homeschooled, kind of in a camper van heading all over New Zealand, to then having to go to a high school. And when I applied for the high school that I wanted to go to, where all my friends were going, they said that they didn't want to make the high school accessible. And this is back in the days when they didn't have to adhere to the Disability Discrimination Act on that level. So I actually had to go to a completely different secondary school. And that's when I was all of a sudden the kid in the wheelchair rather than Samantha. So I'm a big believer that if we have positive reinforcement, if we have an inclusive society, and we kind of show the positives from a young age, then you can completely negate all the harmful stereotypes. I feel like I was living proof of that. When I was a teacher, I think that my presence, and not to sound egotistical, but I genuinely believe that having a teacher in a position of power and hierarchy who had such a physical disability impacted how the kids interacted with the other deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent kids. I definitely do, in a positive way. And they would come up to me and they would say, "Oh, Miss, I saw a girl in a wheelchair when I was shopping and I said hello to her." So this is what we need. We need, the problem with systemic ableism and institutionalized ableism is we are all guilty of our unconscious bias, and it's going to take years and years and years to unpack those harmful views that society still has surrounding disability. But all I say is, the pandemic has totally shown the world how fragile we are. Like, no one is exempt, no one is a superhuman, and anyone can become disabled at any time. We are indeed the fastest growing minority group, and that is because predominantly we've got an aging population, but there's a whole host of other reasons why that is. So even if you don't know anyone disabled, then I urge you to think about your own future and your own kind of how you would want to live the final years perhaps of your life. Would you want to struggle? Would you want to face barriers, or would you like to have a straightforward, easy life as you get a little bit older and you may acquire a disability? So I really, a lot of the kind of lobbying that I do focuses around things like inclusive design, particularly for homes. Because in the UK at the moment, only 9% of homes meet basic accessibility requirements, standards. So for me, it'd be amazing to see us future-proofing with innovation, like designing for the future. If you're elderly and you become disabled, or whoever you are and you become disabled, wouldn't it be great that you can, just navigate that change in your life in the comfort of your own home?
Yeah, and I think it comes back what you were talking about, that positive reinforcement. There's also in the book you've just written, we just talked about that earlier at the start of the program. It'd be great to explore more about that. Your debut new book, You're the Best Thing Since Sliced Bread. But in the book, you actually talk a little bit about on the flip side of that positive reinforcement, but actual toxic positivity. And I guess, you were talking about before about maybe how we don't know how prevalent disability is. So like almost 1.6 billion across the world are living with disability, which is like 1 in 6 people. But we don't hear about it. It's like suicide as well. The news, the mainstream media don't project, the grim reality of things like this. We talked about this with a number of different guests on the podcast, including Gus Warland, and just how, we don't want to tackle those hard issues, and toxic positivity in terms of, if we don't change these difficult elements or difficult aspects of life, how are we going to change it for the next generation? What are your thoughts on that as a concept, but also how is that explored in your new book?
So that's really interesting, because we still kind of pigeonhole disabled people in two ways. So we see them as objects of inspiration, so the Paralympians, the athletes, and so forth, or like a drain on society. So like a like a burden. Like people who can't do anything, don't have any value to the economy and so forth.
So in your new book, you mention, or there's a quote that I particularly liked. It's the story of every young disabled adult who wants to love and be loved, but is met with rejection in an inaccessible world, not just the infrastructure, but the minds of people too.
Yeah.
So I think this is definitely personified in that concept of that that kind of toxic positivity that we were talking about.
Can I be honest? Like, I'm 37 now, and can I be completely honest? Like, the most challenging element of adulthood is not necessarily a decline in health, or just the normal stuff that comes with being an adult. Having to pay bills and like being an adult. It's actually how very much we have a lot more compassion and empathy for disabled kids. This is kind of perpetuated again by the media. I don't know if you've got the equivalent. Like, we have a lot of shows like, Children in Need, that raise funds for the poor disabled kids. And, we foster this real pity, I suppose, towards disabled children, and we kind of want to protect them, and we're like, oh, bless them. And then as soon as you become an adult, so literally, and this is, very much my experience, as soon as I became 18, a lot of the support, so whether that was hydrotherapy, physiotherapy, kind of the support from education and so forth, all that kind of disappeared literally overnight. It was like, right, you're an adult now, and you're no longer this cute and adorable little disabled kid that needs to be protected from the big bad world. And I'm sure all children kind of feel this a little bit as well, but I think it's magnified when you have a disability because you are deemed as vulnerable, quote unquote. So and I often compare it to, like, being a puppy. Like, that puppies are, innocent and can't defend themselves. And I guess I felt a little bit like that as a child, being in a wheelchair. And then like I said, and then all of a sudden you're in the big bad world and you're a drain. You're a drain on society. You're a burden. Why aren't you getting a job? Well, why aren't you paying for your own wheelchairs? Why aren't you contributing towards society? And I guess, that was the biggest shock for me. I was put up on this pedestal for the most part. I didn't ask to be put there, but I was put there for the most part of my childhood and, I suppose, adolescence. And then all of a sudden, it went from that to you need to pay for yourself, otherwise people are going to target you for, getting things like special treatment or benefits or care. I've literally had people say, well, why should you get a free wheelchair? Why don't you just get a loan and pay for it yourself? So these attitudes are out there, and no one really prepares you for that. And I think, toxic positivity, in the sense of, when I talk about like inspiration porn, we get people, I've had people come up to me, and this is before I was a public figure, like random strangers in the street go, oh my god, you're so inspirational. And I'm like, first of all, you don't know me. I might be an absolute bitch. How do you, why would you think that? And it's purely because they look at you and go, wow, if I were in a wheelchair, I don't know whether I would be out getting drunk, out snugging a guy in a pub, or wearing a Louis Vuitton bag, or being on television. I don't think I wouldn't have that courage if I looked like you, or you were in a wheelchair, because we inherently think having a disability is a bad thing. And so now I challenge people, and I say, if I've inspired you, what have I inspired you to do? To be a good writer, to be an actress, to be a entrepreneur. Like, what? Don't just throw empty words at disabled people and then walk away, because actually what you're saying is, I recognize that the world is disabling. I recognize that it must be bloody challenging being in a wheelchair. I recognize that. But instead of saying, well, how can I make the world better? I'm just going to go, oh, you're so inspirational, and then go away with your day.
But besides the challenges, the obstacles, the discrimination you talk about, and how there is a really exciting and wonderful element to the world that people living with a disability can ultimately explore. I guess when we talk about that social model, when the world accommodates them, and when you do have those equality in terms of opportunities. Now, what I normally do with all my guests that I get on the podcast is I kind of get them to provide a bit of some more practical tools that listeners can use. It's not just us rambling on and talking nonsense, but some things that they can really take away from each episode and apply in their own life. And if there's any, parents out there living with, a child that is living with a disability, or if they're living with a disability themselves, what kind of self-help tools, apps, podcasts are out there, even ergonomically friendly, brands or devices that, you've found? There's actually a website in Australia called Spinal Life Australia, and they actually have like accessibility on their page. So there's a map, and you can actually rate different restaurants or facilities in terms of their accessibility.
Yeah.
The Access Now app has a very similar function, which people can download on the App Store and Android.
Yeah.
And, there's augmentative and alternative communication apps that provide, picture-based communication for people with intellectual or speech impairments.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and I can't name specifics. I think a lot of them are, UK based, like Access Able and so forth. I don't know what your normal,
so obviously
your target, where your
depending on the
demographics
geographic
are.
location, yeah.
But all I would say is if you are prominent on social media, I would say, follow people like me and then look at who I'm following and kind of learn that way. I think there's such a rich, for all the woes of social media, I think what's beautiful are young disabled people are creating their own narrative, and that's really nice to see. That's something that I didn't have growing up. I think, best bit of advice is, if you've met one deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent individuals, essentially that's what you have done. You've met one deaf, disabled, or neurodivergent individual. Like, we are all the same. I think for parents, I had quite a toxic codependent relationship with my mum, which wasn't healthy for either of us. So I think, parents need to be very respectful of boundaries with their disabled kids. I appreciate that you want to protect them, but it's their life to live, and although you are there to help facilitate that, be mindful that they have their own voice. So even when we're talking about language, avoid using euphemisms when we're talking about disability. Ask your child how they want to identify. So it's about autonomy ultimately, and I think we kind of forget that. Also, be mindful that of the language you use. I actually came under a kind of a lot of heavy I don't want to say scrutiny, but from parents when I wrote about be mindful of not overusing the word brave around disabled kids. Like, I felt like a lot of my childhood, which was having operations or in pain or feeling excluded by peers, my parents would use very kind of toxic positivity, I suppose, words like, oh, you're so brave and you're so great. And although I think there's a time and a place for that, but actually what it meant was I masked and I hid a lot of my emotions, and I felt like I couldn't actually express the fact that sometimes I wanted to feel sad about my situation. And as an adult now, I'm in therapy, not just for that, but these are things that I explore in therapy. So just be mindful of parents that if your kid, as I said earlier, if your kid wants to have a violin day, allow them to have a violin day. It doesn't mean that don't give them positive reinforcement, but I think like everything in life, there needs to be a balance.
And so that book gives a really clear and honest view, just like you've portrayed there, in terms of what it's like living with a disability. One of those ones that I think we all see all too commonly is how society kind of sees disabled individuals as like exhibits. And we stand and people stand and they stare. And sadly, this is something that's accompanied you throughout a lot of your life. You talk in the book a bit how you overcome a lot of these barriers and challenges. What can you talk to that concept a little bit more?
Well, I think it comes down to parenting, and it comes down to education. We need to start educating our kids. So have these conversations with your kids at home. Get a Barbie doll that's in a wheelchair. Get a book on autism. Watch a TV show with a presenter who has a limb difference, and talk openly and honestly with your kids when they go, why are they in a wheelchair? Why do they look different? So I think parents, if you want to be a responsible parent, then the onus should lie with you. I think it's not fair to expect disabled people to be constantly having to educate others. I am an educator. I get paid to educate people. I'm happy to educate people, but I don't expect every disabled person to do that simply because they're disabled. And I think, For me, struggled like many people as a teenager when people would stare or glare or point at me just because I was in a wheelchair. And my sister, she made a point to me one day because I really like fashion. You might not be able to tell today, but normally I really, I embrace fashion. It's a big part of my identity, and it was growing up. I've got just a knack for putting things together and so forth. And my sister said to me one day when I felt like people were really staring at me and I broke down in tears, and she said, maybe they're looking at you because they like your lipstick or they like your handbag or the fact that your outfit is so well put together. And I never really thought on those lines. Now, at the end of the day, probably 4 out of 5 people staring will do it because it comes from a place of ignorance, and I do not condone that. But you never know what other people are thinking. And when I've talked to other disabled friends of mine and shared this experience with them, they've said, "Oh my gosh, you're right. I was on a train the other day and someone was staring and I felt uncomfortable and I didn't know what to do." But when they got off the train, someone said, "Oh, can I just ask you where you got your trainers from?" So let's not always go to a negative when we feel threatened or intimidated. We all need to learn our own coping mechanisms because unfortunately we're not going to change ignorance overnight. We're not going to change ableism overnight. So you need to dig deep and find worth in your self-worth. I always smile at people if they stare because I like to treat people how I like to be treated. And maybe, just maybe, it might trigger something in them to be a better human being and to identify their own enabled privilege.
Yeah, I think it's a really strong message there, Samantha. Like, and also the message or the story that we paint in our own minds is often a very vastly different picture to what the person staring at you might be.
Negative bias.
Yeah,
We all have negativity bias.
yeah. And I guess one thing that I really wanted to discuss with you is I guess the things that you've taken out of writing the book that have really maybe helped you explore some of the more exciting achievements that you've been able to accomplish throughout your life. Was it nice to reflect on that through the process of publishing that book, and kind of what do you look back on as the best moments that you reflect back on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any one kind of moment. I think every achievement should be celebrated. I think when you're, when you're facing such when you're facing a label from a young age, any way of negating that label is a win. So I don't think we should kind of mark big achievements and be like, well, that was a turning point. Me just waking up sometimes when I'm in pain and, tidying the house, I get the most fulfillment from, like my independence is the biggest thing for me. And I kind of give myself pats on the back quite frequently. But I guess one thing that was a turning point was becoming a trustee for the Brittle Bone Society. And up until that point, so this is in 2010, up until that point, although I really felt comfortable in my own skin to a point, we all have bad days. I didn't actually associate with anyone else who was disabled. That was my internalized ableism very much, playing out there. I was a bit like, well, I like me, but I'm not like them, like they're them. And I was feeding into all the harmful stereotypes that we saw throughout society. And then, at the time I was doing my postgrad, I was training to be a teacher, and it was around Christmas time, and I had to go to Sheffield, which is where my specialist hospital is, just for like a routine every 6 months. You go for your routine checkup. And in a hospital, I would say would be the only time that I would come face to face with other people who looked like me or had the same condition as me. And I remember on the way home, I had to get a train. I was with my mum, and there was like delays on the train or cancellations. And I remember it was the department I was working in a like training in a school, and it was a Christmas like dinner, and I really wanted to get back for this Christmas dinner because I really fancied there was a French TA working in the school, and I had the biggest crush on him, and I was like, I need to get back to this party. And I knew, and I mentioned this earlier, that the trains only have very limited spaces for wheelchair users. And I knew that if the trains were cancelled, then I would, potentially, have to wait for hours.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I quickly dashed to the I don't know what you call them, the person on the train track, I've lost the word.
The direct.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyhow,
the conductor. The conductor.
Yeah, conductor. Sorry, the conductor. And I grabbed him quickly, and I went, I need to get on the train. And at the same time, another woman who clearly had the same condition as me, she was there as well. And we were both like, we need to get on this train. And we kind of like bullied this conductor. And he was like, okay. So he kind of shoved us on this train, but we were right next to the toilet. So we weren't in the allocated wheelchair space. It was kind of like the in-between bit. But we were just both grateful that we were on the train. And I kind of had a girl crush on her. She was a bit of a punk rocker. She had piercings and bright red lips, and she had fishnet tights. And she actually had like a can of beer in her hand. And I just kind of fell in love with her because she completely dispelled all the ideas I had in my own mind about what disability should look like. Yeah. And she was stood next to this really attractive guy. And it's so funny because I can clearly remember me thinking, that can't be her boyfriend. And that's my internalized ableism playing out again. And because I assumed that, being disabled means you're undateable, you're not attractive. And we got chatting, and she was like, I really like your vibe. But I was like, I really like your vibe, I think you're great. And she went, look, I'm a trustee for the Brittle Bone Society. She went, and we're looking for a new trustee. And I think you would be great. You're exactly what we need, like what other people with brittle bones need. And after we exchanged details and we stayed in contact, and then a few months later, I went to the first annual general meeting that I'd ever been to of the Brittle Bone Society. I put my name up for trustee, and I became trustee, and I was there for 6 years. And in that time, I met so many people that looked like me, that had my same condition, other family members, and I embraced my disability identity. And now I can say that I love and I'm proud of that characteristic, because what they taught me was the social model of disability. They taught me that I'm not the problem, and I should be proud of that part of who I am. And ultimately that led me on to my charity work, led me on to moving to London, and led me on to where I am now. So that was a really pivotal time for me.
Yeah, it's an astonishing story, Sam, and I just want to say a big thank you for your time today and sharing all the hurdles and barriers, but also some of the really, really cool stories, and how you not only advocating for change, but really, writing books and getting out there in the media, and also really being a trailblazer for women, not just women living with a disability, but all women in general out there in the community. As I said to you at the start, I'm looking to get more females on the podcast because there's so much great work going on out there in the community. Now, before we wrap things up, I might get you just to plug your book, just so those that are out there listening,
of course,
might like to purchase it. I'm not sure where they'll be able to purchase that in Australia. So it's obviously curated by Fern Cotton and published by Penguin Books. You all are the best things since sliced bread. Yeah. So if you're on the YouTube channel, you'll be able to see that, but also pop something on Instagram and all the socials as well.
So I'm not too sure. I actually recorded the audio version. This is a hardback. I think this year the paperback should be out. It's on Amazon and obviously all the book retailers in the UK. A friend of mine got one delivered to Mexico. So I'm assuming there is a way of getting getting a copy.
Yeah.
But I'm not. Do you know what? I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, if you follow me on Instagram at Samantha Renke, you can definitely kind of stalk me on there.
Just broken up a bit there. That's all right. Keep going on.
Yeah, no, that was it. I think I finished. Yeah. Where did it break
Just
up?
dropped out. So I might just go through that again.
Yeah, no. So the book, I've got an audio copy of it. I wrote it in the studio and did audio. I think it's supposed to be coming out in paperback. I'm not too sure. I think a friend of mine actually got a copy sent to Mexico, so I'm sure there is a way of getting a copy. But obviously, if you head over to Amazon or just follow me on Instagram, so Samantha Renke, and you can, follow and keep up to date with what I'm doing and see how to get a copy there.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Sam. You've been a superstar today, and I can't wait to get this podcast out to all the listeners because I'm sure they'll thoroughly enjoy it just as much as I have. So I'll let you get back to the two little ones.
Thank you so much. I know. Need to crack on with the day, but thank you, Hayden. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, well, I'm off to bed now, but I'll let you get on with the rest of the afternoon over there in the UK.
have a good sleep. Take care.
You too. Thanks, Sam. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Good stuff. Very good.
Thank you so much, my lovely. Right, I'm bursting for a wee, so I'm going to shoot off to the toilet.
I try and keep the podcast to just, max around an hour 15. Generally try to keep it to under an hour, but that was so good. I think people will really, really enjoy your insights there, and you're really good energy. So what I'll do now is I'll edit the podcast. I'll put the clips up on YouTube and get all the social media stuff out. Feel free to do whatever you want with it. Once it's out there, you can download or reshare. I'll probably set you as a collaborator on the Instagram post.
Oh, amazing.
Whatever you want. But what I will do is I'll let you know once it's out there, so you can share whatever platforms you're on. I'll put all the links. I'll put the links to your Instagram and your Facebook and where you can purchase the book and everything in the show notes. Yeah.
Thank you. And just my last name is pronounced Renke, so without an E.
Renke.
So it's spelt with an E, but it's a silent E. Sorry, just a bit annoying. Samantha Renke. Yeah.
I'll make sure. Sorry, I pronounced that incorrect. Does everyone get that?
Okay, everyone does. Don't worry, everyone does. And I'm gonna try and resend everything over to you as well.
Yeah, so I'll probably record that a bit later on before bed. I might see if I can get to the gym quickly, but yeah, I'll record that a bit later on, and then I'll let you know. And it should be up in the next week or so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'll speak to you soon.
See you, Samantha. So good to meet you.
Bye. And you too, my love. Bye.